All right, let's pour some pu'er tea and get started. Cheers, my friend. Thanks for coming down.
Cheers to you. Thanks
Yeah.
for having me.
What a fantastic piece of work you've created. Breath. I mean, such a simple topic. We're all doing it, but it has so much relevance to everything in life, our health, vitality, immune system, mind, our spiritual connection. How was that for you? How was the journey?
It was a complete pain in the butt, to tell you the truth, because when you start looking into breathing, you find all these different modalities that were developed over thousands of years, but a lot of those cultures didn't talk to one another. And so as an outsider looking in, you're looking through these books that are filled with 400 different breathing practices. Okay, where do you start? What do they do? They have these titles you can't understand. At least I didn't understand. And yet we know that the benefits of these breathing techniques are scientifically validated. So how do you first go into this field? What do you start with? What do you end with? What is your approach? Do you start with the Western science or do you start with the Eastern science? And so I did all of those things at the same time and had to rewrite this book about 4 or 5 times because I just couldn't figure out the story behind the story.
What I loved about it was that it was a story, that it was your story, and you started with the storytelling of you doing this experiment, and then you weaved in all the research, the East and the West, but it was in such a storytelling way that made it so compelling. I mean, you started with plugging up your nostrils. I mean, started with something crazy.
Yeah, it's funny because my intention starting this book was never to have me a part of the story at all. I never start with that. And this was the same with my previous book. And yet you get into these situations in which the only person to do that thing at that time is you, or else it's not going to be done. And I'm obviously curious and I want to be able to write about this stuff from the inside, not just an outsider looking in. So that's why I thought it would be the proper thing to actually participate in some of these breathing techniques to try to study what's happening to my body and then use my body as a lens into what's happening to your body and everyone else's. So the Stanford experiment was just that, looking at mouth breathing versus nasal breathing and how those two different ways of breathing can affect your mind, your body, your snoring, your sleep, your anxiety, and more.
And this is such a Eastern way of doing science, the subjective science of, hey, I'm going to go inward and see what happens when I do this, when I breathe slow, when I breathe fast, when this happens, when I connect to nature. And these mystics from the East, thousands of years ago, developed all these techniques in the subjective science and tuning into nature and confirming with colleagues. And, you know, it's been a medicine and a science and a spiritual practice for about 4,000 years. And what I find so exciting is now, in so many regards, Western medicine and Western science and quantum physics is starting to speak the same language. And these objective science from the West and subjective science from the East are converging. And I think your book did a brilliant job in blending those two in a really compelling way. Because for me, I have such a background in the East, but when I hear the Western science confirming it, it's just like, yes. And it made me dive into some of my practices even more because of that. It's so compelling. How is it that your journalistic background really helped you to put together this compelling book? I mean, are you a breath work teacher now? You've done so much research. You're probably an expert in the field, but are you going out and teaching breath work workshops?
Yeah, you haven't seen my closet. It's nothing but robes. I got rid of all my other clothes. And
Good.
a lot of necklaces and
Good,
crystals.
yeah.
So
Yes.
thanks for asking.
That mine is all silk robes of
Good.
Tai Chi master. So
We have great Halloween costumes.
Yes, we
whenever
do.
That comes around.
Yeah.
So my job as a journalist is to be
Yeah.
objective and to listen to everybody and to take conversations with everyone and look at everyone's research. I don't think it's a service to the book or journalism to just go down one path and try to confirm what you thought the answer was going to be. I think it's in everyone's best interest to be curious about everything. This means the guy working in a garage who doesn't have a doctorate, and this also means the expert in the field at Stanford or Harvard. And by talking to hundreds and hundreds of these people, a story starts to develop. And so that's what I tried to do for the first few years. I was just researching every day, every night. I got pretty obsessive about this, maybe in not the healthiest way, because I could see that there was a story behind the stories we're usually told, both in biology texts and an ancient Chinese text, ancient Hindu text. There was something else that everyone could agree on, that the science has validated. And along with that, breathing's so great because it's easy to measure. So once you have measurements, once you see this happening to yourself, look at your heart rate, look at your blood pressure, circulation, oxygenation, then you begin to open up a bit more, that after a few seconds of breathing a certain way, your body changes, your brain changes. So what happens when you breathe this way for a couple of days? What happens after a couple of weeks or a couple of months? Well, I'll tell you what happens. I've seen people absolutely transformed by this. And this isn't anything woo-woo. This is biology. This is taking our most basic biological function and honing it and being able to process air, which is where we get most of our energy, more efficiently. Of course, your body's going to respond to that. So there isn't a huge leap between these things, understanding how breathing differently can benefit people with asthma or autoimmune diseases or depression or lethargy or on and on and on, because of course it does.
You know, in Chinese medicine, breath is called the commander of Qi, your life force energy. So when we look at Qi, which means aliveness, what are those substances that make us alive? So we have food, and you have water and sleep and breath, but our breath is the quickest source to this life force energy. It's the quickest source to Qi. And I love in your book, you research some ancient texts, and these are, Qi Gong texts or Taoist texts talking about breath. And almost always in the text of working with life force energy, they talk about how to breathe in conjunction with movement. And that seems to be what was called the prevention of disease. And so you've seen it now in all this research that you've done. How does breath really affect our health?
Breathing is movement. You can't breathe without movement, and movement is breathing. So breathing dictates your posture, okay? And your posture dictates how you're going to breathe. So if I'm hunched over like this, working on my computer all night, how well am I going to be breathing here? Not very well. I can't take a nice, fluid, deep, and easy breath here. But if I'm like this, and I'm conscious about my posture, this is what makes the body very happy. You can engage your diaphragm more, you can breathe more easily. So those two things together, again, it's not a huge leap of logic to think, oh, how you move might affect how you might breathe. And if you look at what yoga was thousands and thousands of years ago, before it made it into gyms and became Vinyasa Flow, which has been around. No problem with Vinyasa Flow. I do it all the time. I'm a huge fan of it. It's 100 years old. It's not thousands of years old. So yoga was a practice of breathing and holding poses. So there was nothing else more than that. And if you look at what was happening in China shortly after that, it's the same thing. It's breathing and holding poses. And when you breathe into different parts of your body, when you adjust your body, you are going to be breathing differently. You're going to be stretching different areas of the lungs. You're going to be massaging the organs in different ways. So these are two cultures that came up with basically the same exact technology on how to focus this energy that is our breath.
Yeah, beautiful. In Qigong, we often will do exactly that. I'm always like, when I'm teaching stretching, it's not about the stretch, it's about the breath within the stretch. It's not how far you stretch, it's how well you stretch or how well you breathe into stretches. And if we reframe stretching into each pose as a different breath exercise, it becomes really different. It becomes non-competitive, and we don't compete with ourselves into a stretch or a pose. And the nice thing in Qigong, we go into flows. And flows is specifically training to get into flow state. And there's a lot of talk about flow state as peak performance, as about entering the moment, as about being inspired by what you're doing. And so I find breath to be so key and instrumental into accessing flow state. What do you think?
I believe that the benefits of meditation at the beginning don't really have much to do with the actual focus. I know that those benefits come on later. You can grow more gray area. You can do all of these amazing things for your brain and your body. No doubt about that. But for the person just starting, what do you do when you're about to meditate? Okay, sit down and focus on your breath. I don't know of any meditation that doesn't have you start with your breathing. So I started looking at, well, what if you just do that breathing and you don't do the meditation? You know, you don't have to put on your yoga pants or sit in a corner or look at a deity. You can just sit there and focus on your breathing, and just doing that. And there's been various studies looking at this, of how just breathing in different ways will activate different areas of your brain function, will allow you to make more logical and reasoned decisions, because your prefrontal cortex is more aligned with your emotional centers of your brain. So you're not having these outbursts of emotion. It will lower your heart rate, lower your blood pressure, hormone regulation, everything. And again, this I don't view this as any far off thing. We're breathing 20,000, 25,000 times a day. If you're doing that dysfunctionally, how do you think your body's going to react? Well, I'll tell you, go and look at the world right now. Go look at populations in the world, and you'll see it all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned posture in relation to breath, and now that you mentioned that, I notice I'm sitting up taller and breathing a little deeper.
You mentioned that, and I just realized what a slob I am.
That's good. But posture, it also relates to emotions. So you start to see breath connected to everything: mental, emotional states, physical states. I mean, when you sit like this, and when you look at somebody who's depressed, their posture is often down, and somebody who's inspired or happy, they're often up. And it's because with a different posture, you breathe different, and you're communicating to your mind and body in different ways. So would you say that breath is a way in which we communicate between these different aspects of ourselves, our thoughts, our emotions, our physiology, in that bridge?
If you're looking at the connections between the brain and the body, about 80% of those messages are coming from the body to the brain. So it's not just the brain controlling everything. The brain needs input. So by just controlling your breathing, you can send positive messages to your brain. And again, this isn't psychology, this is biology. This is how the body works. So you can actually use your breathing to overtake this stress response, anxiety responses, by just controlling your breathing, by breathing slowly. And then your brain gets the signal that, okay, everything's okay. I'm in a safe place. I'm going to down-regulate right now. I'm going to think more reasonably, and I'm going to be able to function more efficiently. And that really, to me, is what it's all about. And of course, posture plays into this. If you're like this, and if you're closed up, how much of the diaphragm is able to move here? Not a lot. So you start breathing into the chest, and your body registers that as a stress response. Because guess what happens when we're scared? We hold our breath because we're trying to hide from something, or we breathe too much because our body is ramping up to fight something off or to run away. So we do this all day, which is why so many of the modern chronic diseases right now are tied to chronic inflammation. If you look at diabetes, if you look at heart disease, you can just go down the list: increased risk of stroke, hypertension. This is all tied to this low-grade stress throughout the day, and breathing plays a huge role in that.
Yeah. And stress is such an interesting topic, because stress is the root cause of so many illnesses. And what is stress but a perception? It's not actually real most of the time, but we start to perceive. And then how does that stress, that perception of stress, get into our nervous system? It's through our breath. We start changing our breathing. Your body and your nervous system start to say, oh, we must be stressed. There must be some life-threatening thing. And so then we have these chronic ailments because of stress. I read an interesting statistic, which was 89% of all primary doctor visits are stress-related. So almost 90% of the reasons we get sick are due to stress. And so if we change our breath, we change that perception of chronic stress, and we switch into rest and digest, where your body heals. How does breath get us into that healing state?
Well, I think you're right with that perceived danger, and that's an important word, perceived, because our bodies have all of these different amazing functions that have allowed us to survive for so long as a species, right? And I love those functions. Those functions can be used, and we can benefit from them greatly, but we should not be in these certain functions throughout the day. So we've developed these sympathetic responses, that quicker breathing or holding your breath, to there's a woolly mammoth coming into the cave. Hold your breath.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now it's coming after me.
Yeah.
Let's get the respiration up. Let's
Right.
deliver oxygen to the whole body so that we can run harder, right?
Yeah.
You know, or stab it or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think that today our perception of stress, we're so sensitized that we'll open our emails and we'll see an email from a coworker, or from a boss, or from a partner, and that stress response goes up to basically the same level it would have gone up to if we were, you know, getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger.
Yeah.
So, but we don't know how to turn it down. And so then another email comes, and then constantly flooding your body with adrenaline and cortisol is going to wear it down. No one's going to argue this, right? But the question is, it's like, okay, we're constantly stressed. What do we do about it? And breathing is the quickest intervention. Yeah, you can go on vacation. You can take long, warm baths. All that, you can dance, movement, yoga, that's great. But what do you do at the moment, right there? It's not about popping some goo into your mouth. It's about controlling your breathing, down-regulating your nervous system, trying to get rid of some of that stress so you can operate more efficiently. I keep using that word, efficiency, but you know, compensation, just getting by, is different than efficiency and health. And so many of us are just compensating. We can do that for a long time. After a while, it's going to break us down.
Yeah, it's like we're not thriving in life. We're surviving, but it's not a every day being like, oh, I'm inspired, I feel good. I mean, always thinking about how do we get out of survival mode, right? Where those emails or the traffic or your boss or your relationships and putting you into woolly mammoth kind of stress. And we're moving into the heart, so we live with more joy, more compassion, more connection, which is where we want to be. How do we live? I mean, so here's the question. Stress isn't always bad, and we can use stress to strengthen ourselves. And this can be seen in the breathwork techniques, is that we put ourselves consciously into stress mode so that we can override it and work with it in shorter periods of time so that it's not overtaking us in long periods of time. This is called hormetic stress, right? We put our breath or respiratory system under stress like you would weightlifting. How does that work?
Well, this was something that when I mentioned reading all those yoga books, it's like, okay, some of them say breathe through your nose and breathe very calmly and softly. It's like, great, I get that. I can feel that. But then you have these methods where you're breathing as fast as you can, holding your breath, breathing more, holding it in, scrunching. And I said, this is completely against what I had just learned. And so I went down this deep hole of research and found that these other breathing techniques, I call them breathing plus. I just put them all in this umbrella because once you understand the foundation of breathing, you can start going off into these other areas. But it's important to understand that foundation: nasal breathing, controlled breathing, slow breathing, all of that. But what they do is they purposely elicit a stress response in our bodies. And they compound that stress so that we can spend 20 days in that mode of stress, breathing as hard as we can. So the other 23 and a half hours a day, we can be extremely calm and relaxed. So it's about that 20 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It's been a long day driving down here. That 20 minutes a day. Do not spend 20 days in stress. Bad idea. 20 minutes a day, 15, 20 minutes a day. It's like a pressure release valve. And I'm a huge fan of these breathing practices. I do them all the time, and I would be pretty bummed out if I didn't have them in my life to revert to them.
Yeah, they seem to power up your energy. So 20 minutes a day, it's like exercise. You exercise 20 minutes a day, go hard 20 minutes, and you get in good shape. So 20 minutes of practicing breathwork techniques gets your respiratory system in good shape and stronger, more powerful. And when we look at it from a Chinese medicine perspective, it gives you more qi, because breath is qi, and qi is what? Life force energy. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to put yourself under a little bit of stress by breathing fast or emulating almost like a stressful pattern, holding the breath, breathing fast. So, and what I find is that when you come out of that, all of a sudden you can breathe slower and deeper, so much more efficiently and effortlessly.
That's exactly right. And a lot of people may have heard of Wim Hof. And when you see Wim Hof on a video, he's saying, everyone breathe as much as you can. Everybody hold your breath, breathe.
Yeah.
I've talked with Wim so many times now, and that's the guy in front of the stage doing that for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, he is completely chill, breathing so slowly, humming a lot, and people don't see that other side because it's boring. You don't want to see someone just sitting there and breathing slowly. You want to see someone saying, go for it. Yeah. But the important part of this is to make the respiratory system, to make your body, to make your nervous system flexible. And so once you learn how to turn on this stress, you learn how to turn it off. So when other stress happens and you notice yourself breathing too much, I'm breathing too much, I'm going to slow this down and I'm going to reverse this stress, which is why these hormetic stress or hormesis, this is so effective for people with autoimmune diseases who their immune systems are running amok. They need this reset. And there's been a lot of research into this lately, which is fascinating to think, like arthritis, you can blunt some of the symptoms or reverse it with breathing. That doesn't make any sense. Psoriasis, eczema, like all of these people who had these chronic problems that they were told were incurable. For 10 years, they took various drugs, wasn't really working. Maybe it was a Band-Aid for the symptoms. They learn how to breathe, some cold exposure, they connect back to their bodies, and they're like, this is weird. Now I don't have this chronic inflammation. I'm not saying this is going to work for everyone. There's no blanket prescription, but this stuff is free. It's available to us, and why not try it? The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to feel better. That's not too bad.
That's not bad. That's a side effect of this kind of medicine, right?
That is the major side effect, is feeling better.
Feel better. Okay, let's do that. I mean, the breath in healing, here's how the medicine worked in Chinese medicine in ancient times. You would pay your doctor, your acupuncturist, or your Qi Gong master, and as soon as you got sick, you stopped paying. So I think that is true healthcare. Like, hey, I don't feel good. I got this problem. I got neck tension. Okay, stop paying me. I'm not doing my job. That is healthcare. Now we have sick care, right? You don't go to your doctor and say, hey, I feel great. What should I do? They don't have any answers, because health is not, in the East, is not a destination. It's always a journey. So you're always breathing. We're always eating. We're always moving. We're always taking care of. What am I doing today to invest in my precious life force energy? And breath is always, like you said, always the starting point. Okay, let's start with breathing. And so we can access the body's healing power and stay healthy. How do you think breath relates to prevention?
I think what you said there is what is exactly happening in Western medicine right now. Maybe it's not coming from the institutions, but look at all of these different wearables, right? If you're following the prescription delivered from these wearables, as far as your sleep is concerned, your blood glucose or your nervous system function, the moment you start getting sick, you're going to be like, this thing doesn't work. I'm going to throw this. I'm not going to subscribe to this monthly fee anymore to do this because it's not working. So I see this big flip happening right now, and it's only because things have broken down and gotten so terrible in healthcare. And I heard this from doctors. This is not my opinion. There's doctors in my family. They said it's gotten so bad that people are now needing to rebuild this. Now we're going to have this breakthrough because we've had this breakdown of the system. So I believe that is coming up out of necessity. Humans are very reactive. So it's only when we're really injured, when we're really hurt, that we do anything about anything. So I see that this is what's happening with health, and it's fascinating that this was the model of Chinese medicine,
isn't it?
For thousands of years. Yeah,
let's focus on, because what we focus on grows stronger. So like if you're focused on movement and breath, if your focus is on vitality, it grows. But unfortunately, we have a focus on sickness. And even though we have great technology, Western medicine, incredible technology, we have more sickness, disease, problems, side effects than ever before.
Yeah, and I am a huge fan of Western medicine. I want to be clear. If I get in a car accident, I don't want acupuncture. Maybe afterwards during the recovery. Don't try your breathing methods, right? If someone stabs you in the chest, go to a doctor and get it sewn up. Take your antibiotics. Do all of that stuff. But it doesn't have to be this or that. It's not a binary thing. These things are these areas are starting to talk to one another right now in a big way, and this is the way to move things forward.
Cool. Here's a good question. What if everybody in the world was a good breather? How would that change humanity? What's your vision on that?
Well, if we were to do an experiment, we would need a control group, and then we would need the treatment group. So we've got the control group right now. And if you look around the world and you see about 10% of the population has asthma, about 15% has chronic sinusitis, about 50% of us snore, about 20% of us have sleep apnea. So the majority of us have chronic respiratory issues. And that's really bad news. How many of those people could see their symptoms start to disappear after a few weeks or months? I don't know. Nobody knows. We're never going to know. What we can do is look at the scientific literature and see each of these populations and see what happens when they acquire healthy breathing habits. And the scientific literature has said very clearly that symptoms will tend to decrease, and in some cases, you can reverse these conditions. And that seems impossible until you realize that these conditions are caused by, so many of them are caused by improper breathing. So why would you try to address the other symptoms of this without addressing the breathing? It doesn't make any sense to me. Asthma, it's a breathing disorder. So let's just give someone bronchodilators, but not address the core problem of their asthma. Some people have allergic asthma. That's a different thing. But I've seen over several years, time and time again, I've talked to dozens and dozens of people. I've seen the studies. There are dozens of studies. And when these people acquire healthy breathing habits, they can be absolutely transformed. I met a 70-year-old woman who had had asthma for 60 years of her life. She couldn't go outside to play with the kids. Okay, she couldn't go on hikes. She basically stayed inside. And she was never told that breathing might help her. She was given more oral steroids, bronchodilators, which absolutely help. They're amazing drugs for the symptoms, not the core problem. She adopted healthy breathing habits and is now traveling the world, she's 70, is going on hikes, and she feels like so much of life had been left behind for her that she wants to make up for it. And this is confirmed by studies, right? And so that to me is, it's not a controversial thing. Does it work or doesn't it work? It works, but why don't more people know about it? That's the thing, and I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah, I know there really isn't a good answer. It's like when you look at breath and movement, right? Because everything in nature is moving, and this universe is moving. We're living a moving universe, and what happens is, we as human beings, as we get older, we stop moving. We shorten our breathing. I was telling a class of mine the other day, nobody gets off a long plane flight. I've been on a plane flight for 11 hours, and I go, oh man, I feel so rested. I feel so good. Your chi, your energy, your body becomes stagnant. And where things don't move is like where water doesn't flow. It gets stagnant. And if we don't breathe deep and exercise the full capacity of our lungs, it gets stagnant. And then because this is the first doorway where energy pours in, then your whole system can get stagnant. And the manifestation of that stagnant energy or flow is varied depending on the person. And so, unfortunately, in the Western medicine, we always are looking at the symptom. In the East, we look at the root because the paradigm's different. If you're looking at health, you want to look at the root cause, whether it's stress or a headache or asthma or anxiety. What's the root cause of that? And let's address that, because then there's a cascade of healing that goes on. And if you just address a symptom, you get side effects of that medication. So you can take an inhaler, but it causes this problem or that problem. And so looking at the root cause, don't you think that breath work is addressing that root cause and that it has a tremendous healing impact on our whole system in general?
Yeah, it does. It is not a cure-all for everything. And
Right.
I try to make that very clear in the book. Like, health is more complicated than that.
Yeah.
Just like it's more complicated than take your vitamins, you're going to be fine, you can eat whatever you want.
Right.
We know that's not true. I view breathing as right alongside of nutrition and movement and sleep, right? So I think it needs to be part of that conversation. And from what I've seen, it really hasn't been in our cultures. It has been in the East, absolutely. It was right up there the whole way through. Because what they understood about this movement, just you could say the Rolling Stone doesn't collect moss or whatever.
Right.
But our bodies respond in the same way. And breathing isn't just this biochemical process about getting oxygen in and CO2 out. When you're breathing, you are moving the inside of your body with that diaphragm. That diaphragm is pumping up and down. That determines so much of our circulation and our lymph fluid circulation. So when we're not engaging that diaphragm, when we're just breathing into our chest, that diaphragm isn't able to go down and massage these organs and help them leach out lymph fluid. And you talk to so many doctors where people have these chronic problems in their gut. It almost starts to calcify and get firm after a while because it just sits there. And these are all these toxins. This really wants movement. The body wants blood to be flowing, right? It wants these fluids to be in constant movement. And breathing is the quickest way that I've seen to really elicit that. Of course, you need to exercise as well. Of course, you need to eat right. But you also need to breathe right, because no matter if you're keto or paleo or vegan or carnivore or whatever, and no matter if you're working out for 6 hours a day, if you're not breathing right, you will never, ever be healthy, ever. And I'm more convinced of this now than I ever have been.
That is really interesting, because there is such an emphasis on food, right? You go to a bookstore, books on diet. And so food in Chinese medicine is called gu qi. It's the energy you get from food. But it's a slower energy, because we can go a long time without food, right? Hours, days, month without food, and you still have qi, you still are alive, but not breath. Breath is minutes, and we got to breathe. So that's why it's so tuned into our health and our vitality. And if the breath isn't harmonized, then the qi doesn't flow. If the qi isn't flowing, it's like the electricity not getting to the appliances. We short circuit in the electrical system, and there's no energy to the appliance, to one of the systems in your body. And so breath was seen as first and foremost. Like almost always when you start with a health class from Eastern perspective, you'll see people say, okay, let's work on the breath, because it's so fundamental. And it's one of those pillars, like you said, sleep, food, breath, movement. It should be those 4 pillars. And how do we optimize those? Because in Chinese medicine, I think you'll find this fascinating. When you combine breath and food, it's a different qi. So if you eat healthy and you breathe right, you create something called true qi. So that's that combination. And how do you see food playing a role in the pillar of health with breath?
Well, it's another energy source, just as the Chinese understood. So we get glucose. We have to use that in conjunction with oxygen to run aerobically. So our bodies can run anaerobically for a little bit, and that's fine, but we should not be staying in the zone. It can build up a bunch of toxins in the body by being too anaerobic. So we can only burn fat in the presence of oxygen, a lot of oxygen. So if you're not breathing properly, if you're breathing specifically too much, and this is where this stuff gets so confusing, over breathing makes it harder for your body to get oxygen. So if you go to a gym, or who's doing that in a pandemic? Not too many people. So go outside, you see people running, and I'm a real freak, so I notice how people are breathing now. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. So just a warning. But of the 30 people I've seen running around in the past week, one guy was breathing through his nose. And this is why it's important to breathe through the nose, because this inhibits how much breath you can get in and out of your body. And it slows that breath down to allow you to extract more energy, more oxygen. When you're breathing like this, just those few breaths, some maybe tingling in my fingers, maybe I'll feel lightheaded. It's not from an increase of oxygen, but a decrease of circulation. So especially when you're working out, when you're breathing too much, you're doing yourself no favors at all. You're making it harder for you to get to your accomplished state, which is for some people to lose fat, to gain muscle, to get more energy.
Oh, that's so interesting. So it's counterintuitive to what we think. Oh, oxygen is good. Every cell in our body needs oxygen, but if you breathe too much, you become like diet, like eating. You overeat. We over-oxygenate, and that's not healthy. So in general, the best way to breathe in everyday life, how would you describe it?
To breathe within your metabolic needs. Easier said than done, right? If everyone could do that, maybe someone's going to build an app or a wearable to allow you to do that. But if you can't have access to an app, what you can do is you can breathe through your nose, because this is the gateway to your lungs. This is what filters air. This is what heats it, humidifies it, and removes a bunch of pathogens, bacteria, including viruses. So when we breathe through our mouth, hopefully there's no viruses.
Yeah.
I'm just exposing my lungs to everything in the environment. There's no filter. When you breathe through your nose, you're like, this takes so much longer to breathe this way. That's a good thing, because you're forcing that air through a gauntlet of different structures where it is cleaned. So I'm not saying you're never going to get sick if you breathe through your nose. I am saying you're going to lessen the load of whatever you have. And if you're in a city like I am, there's pollution, allergens, pollens, dust, mold. Why would I want to expose myself to that 20,000 times a day? I wouldn't. So that's why we have noses. And noses just are not, they're considered this appendage, like an appendix almost. I got a mouth. Why do I want my nose? Look at any other animal in the wild, right? Look at how it breathes. Look at a cheetah running at 50 miles per hour, stalking prey, nasal breathing. Look at a horse.
Right.
Dogs breathe from their mouth to thermoregulate, to offload heat, right? But look at them sleeping. They're breathing through their noses. Right. We are a species of mouth breathers right now, and it's causing so much damage to us.
Oh, that's so true. One of my teachers, somebody asked him, hey, what's the best way to breathe? And he said, mouth for eating, nose for breathing.
Yeah.
That was it. And, you said there's thousands of breathing techniques, but we can simplify, 95% of the time, that's really the way we want to breathe. Slow, deep, through the nose.
And it trains us. So, because we don't have that app, because a lot of people don't want to calculate on a sheet of paper, like how many breaths they're breathing a day, even though the Chinese did this. So they were very good. They said 13,000 breaths a day. That's
the magic number? Oh, good. I didn't even know that.
God, if we had time, if we didn't have Facebook and email, I could be counting your breaths now.
We could be. We'd be
Maybe
in the
I'd
moment.
have a little clicker here every time you breathe. So, if we don't have that, we can just breathe through our noses, and we're probably 70% there of becoming a healthy breather if we're becoming chronic nasal breathers, especially at night. So it's easier in the daytime. Like, I'm conscious, I can breathe through my nose. Guess what happens to 60 to 70% of us at night? This is so bad. And no one's really talking about how just breathing through your mouth increases your chance of having periodontal disease, cavities, snoring, sleep apnea, lung infections, and more. And it's such a simple thing that, eat with your mouth, breathe through your nose.
I know.
There.
Okay. Done.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things in your book, in the study that you did. You showed just 2 weeks of mouth breathing led to incredible health problems. I mean, it was like eating McDonald's every day for 30 days. It was, significant. And I think people are doing that for years and years and years. When we're talking about preventing problems or even healing ailments, just closing your mouth while you sleep is such an important thing. And it's easy enough to do, right?
Yeah, well, scientists have known this for decades and decades. Even 100 years ago, dentists were talking about all the damage we're causing by mouth breathing, especially when we're young. If we walk around with an open mouth, it's so common, it's called adenoid face, because your scelicature changes. You adopt this narrower face, chin goes back like this. And if you see this, I'm a great example of this. So I think I was a mouth breather through much of my life. And that can actually impact, there's some evidence showing that could impact how your teeth grow in, because the reason why all of us, the majority of us, have crooked teeth is because our mouths are too small for our faces. And when a mouth is too small for its face, teeth have nowhere to grow in straight, so they grow in crooked. Guess what else happens when you have a mouth too small for your face? You have a smaller airway, which makes you more susceptible to breathing problems. So it starts early. That's why it's so important for kids not to be mouth breathers day and night.
Interesting, as I have an infant, so 3 months, and we're looking at some infant studies and books and reading, and they said if there's a pacifier in the infant's mouth, way less chance of infant mortality while they're sleeping. And they become healthier with the pacifier while they're sleeping. I thought that was fascinating. That you think, oh, we should make sure the baby can breathe, but stick something in its mouth so it has to breathe in through the nose. So I thought that was fascinating right from that age.
That can be a short-term solution, but overuse of pacifiers can change the growth of the mouth.
Okay, good.
And affect the teeth. So
I'm glad I asked you.
This is not my area of expertise. There are other people who are very well qualified to answer this. The good thing about pacifiers, you're breathing through your nose.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful thing. The bad thing is if infants get used to these and use them for years and years, they can impact development of the face and of the mouth.
In your book, you do talk about the structure of the mouth in relationship to the breathing and how we eat and the softness of food. So this kind of seems like a modern epidemic in terms of both food and breath, what we were talking about in Chinese medicine, these two pillars of health, and we're just really not doing those fundamental, simple things well.
It is a modern epidemic. And if you don't believe me, go look at ancient skulls, which is something I spent months doing. Yeah. I had heard this years ago by a biological anthropologist that our faces have changed. I was like, how do you know that? That we breathe differently. I was like, yeah, right. And he's like, well, why don't you go look at ancient skulls? So I looked at some online. I was like, this is weird. Everyone I could find online had perfectly straight teeth. Every single one of them. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania, to the Archaeology and Anthropology Museum, to the Morton Collection, which has one of the largest collections of pre-industrial skulls in the world. And they took me into this lab. And there were all these shelves, like these walnut shells, and all these skulls from like Africa, Asia, South America, Europe, US, South Pacific. All of them had perfectly straight teeth.
Unbelievable.
And they had all of their teeth. So these people did not need braces. They didn't need their wisdom teeth removed. How weird is that?
That is
weird. Why
has
has that become a normal thing?
Yeah.
Their mouths were wide enough. And by having a mouth that's wide enough, you will be able to breathe better. They have these huge nasal apertures, these huge sinuses. So we know from the skeletal record that our ancestors were very likely breathing so much better than we are. They had less obstruction.
Oh, that's interesting. Fascinating. Moving topics, we traveled the world looking for extraordinary people, both in healing arts, energy arts, spiritual meditation, consciousness, and Tibetan Buddhism. We went to the caves of the Himalayas. We went to the martial arts masters in China, the Indian yogis. One key thing that accessed and tapped into the human potential was breath. Like fire breath could warm up the monks meditating in freezing sub-zero caves, and they're meditating in those areas, and could give martial arts masters, small people could build up enough qi or power to move and overcome the larger opponent. And so breath seemed to be one of those key things to access our human potential. What do you think?
I think without a doubt. and again, these stories seem impossible. Yeah. And everyone should rightfully call BS on them, because I certainly did. When I heard about some of these stories years ago, I was in Greece writing about freedivers and freediving. I'd never seen freedivers before, and was out on this boat at the first day of this competition and watched these people do this thing that I had understood to be totally impossible. Yeah. Hold their breath for 4 or 5 minutes at a time, dive down on a single breath of air to 300, 350 feet, come back, totally fine. And I thought, if we've forgotten this, because there's archaeological evidence of freediving dating back 10,000 years. Yeah. So we've been doing it for a long time. We've just forgotten about it because we have scuba now. Right?
Yeah, right.
So we don't need to go into the ocean and dive to get fish. We just throw a net or a bunch of hooks out there and we'll grab them. So they were telling me about how breathing could be used to heat the body up, to heal the body, to alter states of consciousness. And I was kind of like, yeah, anyway, go back to the hotel room. But there was something about some of these people were doctors. They were scientists themselves. And I started looking into this. I spent several months trying to bust them. I said, these guys totally wrong about this. And I found out the exact opposite. And if you don't believe me, and you shouldn't, all you have to do is look at Herbert Benson's work at Harvard Medical School, looking at Tumo monks, putting these people in a cold room, okay, getting sheets, getting them wet, draping a sheet over their shoulders, having them dry the sheet in about a half an hour, having their metabolism decrease 60%, so much slower than someone in a coma, and yet the heat in their body increase. And describe to me, first of all, say that that didn't happen, and I'll say you're wrong, because here's a top researcher who's showing it happen, and that study was published in Nature, the most esteemed scientific journal in the world. Cool. And the other question is, well, how do they do that, and how does that apply to me and my understanding of my own body and my own potential? And that is an area that I'm endlessly fascinated with, because these yogis were able to do all this stuff, and now we have measurements to prove that they were able to do this stuff. So how can we adopt some of these things without sitting in a cave for 10 years and apply them to our modern environment to help improve our health? And I think that is, again, a journey that I hope to be taking in the future with some other books and some other research.
Oh, that's exciting. And that's why we wanted to do this documentary. It's just, let's go out there and see what these people are doing. And it's a tradition. And often these traditions were passed down. The teaching was passed down verbally, because it did bring in a lot of power into that person practicing it. But a lot of the masters are saying, hey, now's the time when we need to tap into our human potential. We need it in our healthcare. We need it in our human relations. We need it in our relationship to the earth and to nature. Because when you start to see it as a synergistic system and not an isolated or separate system, that how I breathe affects my mind, how my mind and my thoughts affects my body, how I think and behave affects you, how we work together affects nature, that everything's in relationship. And when I look at the breath, you can see it's not just me breathing by myself. When I'm inhaling, nature's exhaling into me. And when I'm exhaling, nature's inhaling from me, that it's a relationship. And then it starts to see, oh, we're not a separate system, that we're in harmony. And so I feel like just by looking at the breath, we see so-called spiritual principles of oneness and integration starting to emerge from that.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be one or the other, like you have to go all in or not at all. And so much of Western culture is about that, right? I'm going to become a free diver. I'm going to go down to 400 feet in 2 months of practice. It's, maybe someone doesn't want to be able to sit out in the snow and melt a circle around themselves. That's fine, but can we just take some other elements of these practices and apply them to ourselves right now and get some of those benefits? We don't need to do all the things that we were able to do before, because we have houses, we have air conditioning, we have food that's delivered to us, but we still need to heal ourselves. So what parts of those practices can we take and apply to our day-to-day lives?
And I think that is such a good question, because, we don't all need to be the Olympic athletes of breathing or free diving or melting snow or zapping people with electricity. Those are really amazing and inspirational stories, but they, for me, point to the human potential. And that makes me curious, as we started our conversation with curiosity, like, what can I do and what do I want to do? And most people don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to feel depressed, unhealthy, low energy, and not be able to sleep well and be disconnected. No, we want to be healthy and happy and vibrant and inspired and inspiration, and then live in that inspired life. I feel like breath is that foundation. It gives us that like trampoline into bouncing into our potential.
Yeah, it's part of that foundation. It's the most instantaneous way to change your viewpoint, to change how you feel. Again, food is a big part of this, movement's a big part of this, but breath is it's literally instantaneous. Within a few seconds, you can really change your reaction to things. And it's also free. People are going to try to package this up.
Of course.
It's already happening, but it's free. It's available to everyone, everywhere. And we carry our breath around with us all day long. So why not focus on this and hone it a little more and improve it? And from what I've seen, that the benefits can be really pronounced for a lot of people.
Yeah, profound. Well, it's been so wonderful to have this conversation. I mean, the best things in life are breath and Qi.
And they're free.
And they're free.
So
Cheers.
There we go. Thanks for having me.